Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, senhoras e senhores, buenas tardes. Those who are present here with us and those who are listening to us remotely, welcome and thank you for joining the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative and the Ford Foundation today to discuss plans for a fossil fuel-free Amazon. This event seeks to identify solutions and pathways to achieve a fossil fuel exclusion zone in the Amazon that addresses human rights, ecological, economic, and political barriers to stop oil drilling in the world's largest tropical rainforest. As we all know, coal, oil, and gas are responsible for 86% of carbon emissions in the last decade. They are a threat to the global economy, health, peace, and the climate. Yet, world governments plan to produce more than double the amount of fossil fuels by 2030 compared to what would be needed to avoid exceeding the 1.5 temperature goal. Scientists have been warning for decades about the catastrophic results of the climate if the world reaches average temperatures above 1.5. And that only the most drastic cuts in carbon emissions from now would help prevent an even greater environmental disaster. Extraction zones become sacrifice zones. Ecosystems, communities suffer direct consequences, affecting particularly the young generation. These communities are frequently not even consulted about projects that affect their territories, and the ones who oppose often face criminalization or suffer threats and violence. Many human rights and indigenous rights are violated in extraction areas. Communities in the Amazon have suffered direct impacts for decades. In this scenario of the climate crisis, the Amazon is a key territory for its capacity to store carbon underground, as well as for the biological and cultural diversity it harbors, and for the responses to the climate crisis that have emerged from the people who inhabit it. However, it is threatened by the presence of extractive activities of illegal and legal nature promoted by the states and companies, reflecting an extractive development model in which territories are traded as mere commodities. The exploitation of fossil fuels and related activities in the Amazon have left serious environmental, social, and cultural impacts, affecting and violating the rights of indigenous peoples and local communities that inhabit the region, also affecting regional systems and livelihoods. Likewise, oil exploration has systemically increased the loss of biodiversity, forest degradation, and deforestation. Across the Amazon, indigenous peoples are fighting for their rights and working to stop fossil fuel extraction in their territories. In addition, many national governments in the Amazon have expressed support for climate mitigation and protection of human rights and biodiversity. Yet, expansion of oil drilling in the Amazon continues and is having a devastating impact on indigenous lives, livelihoods, and global climate. While there is clear interest in opening up more of the Amazon to oil extraction, like recent efforts in Peru to auction new oil blocks, there are many local and international initiatives aiming to stop exploration. The Amazon Summit held in Belém in August, the national referendum vote in Ecuador to safeguard the Yasuni National Park, the proposal to protect 80% of the Amazon by 2025, and the idea of the Amazon as a fossil fuel non-proliferation zone are all part of key discussions and political developments towards protecting the Amazon. At the Amazon Summit, governments avoided having a firm commitment or quantifiable goals on fossil fuels, and it got only a single sentence in the document stating that countries should initiate a dialogue on the sustainability of sectors such as hydrocarbons and mining in the Amazon region. And that's why we are here now, to build on all the previous Amazon dialogues held before and during the summit, and to continue discussions to make the Amazon a fossil fuel non-proliferation zone a reality. I will now pass on to Jimena Ornaz, Ford Foundation's Program Officer, to say a few words before we begin the panel.
Hello, everyone. Is that okay? Too much echo. Better? Better? There? Okay. It's my immense pleasure to welcome everyone here today. I'm very happy to be able to partner with the Non-Proliferation Treaty, with Amazon Watch, and with many of the partners that are here today. The Ford Foundation has been committed to supporting Indigenous rights for a very long time, for the protection of the forests, to help Indigenous communities get their land rights, their land tenure, and support their autonomies. And this is going a step further as well in saying that extraction in places where there are Indigenous peoples that have an immense value to the world, to the planet, protecting forests, is not a place where there should be extraction of such dirty investments like the fossil fuels. So I just want to welcome you all here to the Ford Foundation and thank you for coming, and very much looking forward to listening to all of you and learning. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimena. We will start now with our first panel, fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon, identifying barriers and solutions to a fossil fuel-free Amazon. I am very honored to introduce you to our incredible speakers. Kevin Koenig is Climate, Energy, and Extractive Industry Director of Amazon Watch. Kevin is leading expert on resource and rights conflicts in the Western Amazon Basin. For 25 plus years, Kevin has worked with Indigenous peoples in defense of their rights and territories and led several advocacy campaigns to restrict fossil fuel supply and create accountability from the extractive industry, finance sector, and government. And in 2007, he joined Ecuador Ministry of Foreign Affairs team to launch the pioneer Yasuni ITT proposal to keep 1 billion barrels of oil permanently in the ground. Ministra Susana Mohammad es una pitóloga, ambientalista y política colombiana, perteneciente al Partido de Colombia Humana. Desde el 7 de agosto.
From August 7 of 2007, she is the Minister of the Environment in San Pedro. Minister She was the deputy of Sao Paulo in 2002. Internationally, she's known for the rights of Indigenous. The most influenced person in the Time magazine. She was the first Indigenous woman to be part of the government. Coordinator of women and first Indigenous woman to be part of the University of Rosario, specialist in public administration and staff. First Amazonian woman to be part of the female Amazonian women. Elaine? She has been the president of Orgasi. She has worked for the defense of the women and of Marañón and of the Amazon in Peru. UN makes front to the diverse problems in her territories, among them the impact of oil in the Amazon.
We will begin now. We will have 8 minutes for each intervention, and we have very limited time, so we kindly ask speakers to stick to time. Otherwise, I may be a little rude and have to interrupt you, so I apologize in advance for that. We will begin hearing from Kevin, who will give us a brief panorama of oil extraction in the Amazon today.
Great, thank you. I need a mic.
There's a mic here. Should be. No, you don't need to use one, there's one here.
Okay.
But if you need to.
Okay. So, great. Well, for starters, thank you to the Fossil Fuel Treaty and Ford Foundation for putting this amazing event together. I'm going to give an overview of fossil fuel extraction in the Amazon, which is a pretty big task in 8 minutes. So we're going to move pretty quickly here. I'm actually going to skip over these first few slides because we already heard about it a little bit, and we're going to hear a lot, obviously, from this amazing panel of people who are that are experts at why the Amazon is important and the dangerous tipping point that it's getting to. We'll hear from them on the panels. But I'm going to start us off actually with a little context that will help us understand where the fossil fuel reserves are and how they got there and how we got into this mess and problem with fossil fuel extraction, at least geologically speaking. So we're going to go back in the day quickly here. Way back into the day, the upper Cretaceous time period here, but I think this helps us understand where these reserves are located, right? Because the Amazon River used to flow, right, from the east to the west until the Andes Mountains rose up and it switched directions. But what happened during that time, right, over those millions of years, is the river deposited microorganisms, detritus, et cetera, that millions of years later became oil, right? And so when you look at this next slide, which is the current hydrocarbon basin in present day, right, you can see that western shield, right? That's where the oil lies. And it also helps explain, right? Right now with the river that's going west to east, it also explains why there's so much interest right now in looking at potential reserves at the mouth of the Amazon River, right? Which Brazil is there's a lot of speculation about that, right? Here's a map right now of current day concessions, and you can see how they, this is all that western shield. This is areas of oil blocks and current production. In the middle there's a sort of patch of that's gas in western Brazil. The next slide here from our friends at Earth Insight shows us the overlap of oil concessions production, but also with tree canopy and indigenous territories, right? So you can see some of these numbers, right? More than 25 million, I can't quite read it from here, but hectares of indigenous territory that are in oil and gas concessions, for example. Here's a quick overview by country that sort of lays out, how much of their Amazon is locked up in oil and gas concessions. But I think the big thing to focus on here, and this is great data from Stan Research Group and Angeline, who's sitting in here, most Amazon crude is coming from Ecuador, right, by a long shot. So we're going to talk more about that. But to just go over oil industry impact, right? We're going to talk about toxic legacies, current production, and the threat of new expansion. These first examples, I think, are important because they really set the stage for how oil extraction was going to happen in the Amazon, right? These examples, Chevron, formerly Texaco in Ecuador, Occidental Petroleum in Peru, these are operations that started in the 60s and 70s, and they were built to spill, right? It was not a one-time incident of Deepwater Horizon, as horrible as that was, but this is operations that were designed on the cheap. They use antiquated technology. And if you go out there, you'll see that the infrastructure takes produced water and brings them directly to the streams of local communities, right? Dumping billions of gallons of water, produced water, which is highly toxic, into the river systems of Amazonian communities that are drinking and bathing and swimming and fishing in these waters. It's also important because when these companies left, not only was there remediation, not only did that not happen in the cleanup, but the state oil company in Ecuador, Petroecuador, took over those operations. And Cruz Petro did the same in Peru, right? So they're operating now with a lot of that same rusty, crumbling infrastructure, and that's why you see the levels of spills and contamination in those places. So we're going to go quickly through these in the interest of time, but these are some great new math from Mangabay. But Ecuador, right? I mean, in 2022, they're averaging 2 spills a week, right? 1,200 spills over the last decade. Peru, similar situation, 600 plus spills since '97. You can see in that northwestern Amazon area and along pipeline infrastructure. As well, Colombia, less spills, but as you can see, a whole 1,200 different environmental incidents related to oil extraction, not just in the Amazon, but other places in the country. And same in Bolivia. There's not a lot of data. Remember, a lot of these spills are the reported spills, but we know that the majority of these actually go unreported, right? Health impacts. Obviously, there are frontline communities, indigenous people living amidst this infrastructure, right? So it's no surprise that there are high levels. These areas you see high levels of cancer, respiratory ailments, miscarriages, birth defects. I'm going to fast forward quickly to just highlight across the Amazon. Obviously, all these projects are riddled with rights violations. I think starting with ethics, I'm hard pressed to find an example of a project in the Amazon where a proper process of free, prior, informed consultation and consent has happened. I don't think it exists. Moving forward to just talk about the threat of new expansion, right? Moving into these areas, the oil frontier, indigenous territories, oil extraction is a major driver of deforestation. And so when you go into these new areas, right, you're creating new arteries, new channels into pristine and intact forests, right? And that brings not only other threats from other industries, agribusiness, illegal economies, logging, but you're also clearing forests. So we're felling forests, right? Standing forests that are essential for climate change mitigation in pursuit of new fossil fuels that we know need to stay in the ground. That's a big threat from the new expansion. Also, as was mentioned earlier, the risk to rights defendants. This is Eduardo Mendua. He was assassinated back in February 2023 as a co-found leader from Ecuador who have been organizing communities against Petroecuador's attempts to open new wells in its territory. So those are on the rise. Another great stat from Stan Research Group. Where does this oil go? The majority to the United States and there to California. 50% of this crude from Ecuador. I'm going to move past these because of time. But as we conclude here are things to cheer about. We heard it earlier. The Yasuni referendum, historic, first time that something like that has happened. Keeps more than, about 1 billion barrels of crude in the ground. It stops new expansion. It stops about 400 plus wells, and it will close 200 plus wells, right? So not only does it stop the new expansion, but they're going to have to dismantle and remove infrastructure and close wells, and that hasn't happened before. Colombia joining BOGA and commitments around no new extraction. I imagine we'll hear about that later, so that's a great thing to cheer about. Efforts in Peru to take away rights from isolated peoples were thwarted not too long ago. And then this last point, banks exiting the trade of Amazon crude. This together, Amazon and Stan, we worked to get 6 big European banks to stop the financing, 85% of the trade financing for crude coming out of the Amazon. That's also something to be cheering about. Last final thoughts here, things that are worrisome. Definitely the more success that communities are having stopping extraction and keeping fossil fuels in the ground and exerting their rights, raising their voices against these projects, we're seeing the threats to these leaders and earth defenders rise. Persecution and threats, but then also assassinations. I already mentioned ethics. The Yasuni decision, the proof is in the pudding now. If we want this to be a world precedent and a lot rides on how this is going to be implemented. The government of Lasso and government ministers are already kind of backtracking and creating some doubt about to what level they will actually implement it. So that's something that we need the eyes of the world on, for it to really be the precedent that I think the world and Ecuadorians who voted want it to be. Justice delayed and justice denied. There are several cases in the Amazon, but in Ecuador in particular, Chevron Texo, a recent case around flaring. Communities have won in the courts, and they cannot get the government and the court system to actually implement the verdicts. Final thought to you though, who is financing this just transition that we're talking about, right? What are the financial mechanisms that are going to help a place like Ecuador or Colombia make a transition to a post-petroleum economy, right? Is it debt relief? I think it's bigger than that. It's bigger than debt for nature swaps. There's issues around debt justice and what the North owes the South, and that ecological debt that needs to be resolved to be able to keep the Amazon intact, respect the rights of indigenous people, and to keep it intact for climate stability. So I'm going to end there, but thank you all.
Thank you so much, Kevin, for this overall context.
Now we're moving on to the Colombian context, and this has been led to protect the Amazon region and to phase out fossil fuels. President Gustavo Petro requested in the summit advocating for the exploration of fossil fuels and in the institutions, and to say that we need to depend on these fossil fuels. And you, Ms. Minister Susana, last May in the Ministry of Environment, you said that it is necessary to slow down the fossil fuels, especially the production of these, especially from the Amazon region, and this should be agreed upon. So now I have the honor to give the floor to her so that she can share about the Colombian plans to stop the oil exploration in the Amazon region. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you for all the work, the holistic work and the voices from the indigenous communities and the different people, indigenous peoples and the local communities, so that they can be heard. Thank you so much for the work of thinking that how we can phase out actively of this dependency situation on the fossil fuels so that we can live with the consequences that we have so far. From Colombia and with the President Gustavo Petro, they are looking all the time, they're trying to understand all the time the climate crisis and its effects. I actually believe that between the listening to the peoples and the communities, but also the scientific knowledge, we understand that the size of this crisis that we are in, that crisis with the middle-income country like Colombia in a situation where simultaneously we have to tackle the effects of a climate crisis that are already happening. And then this, after the pandemic, this delayed at least 15 years in Colombia, the social development of the most vulnerable. Then we had 3 years of El Niño phenomenon, which was not very strong, but it was persistent. Just last year, it brought 1 million damnified people in Colombia. Now we are about to face the El Nino phenomenon that actually came around earlier in the Amazon region, that exposes to big wildfires and other that are quite the scenario for deforestation, but different mobs. And against all these, we are trying for a country like Colombia to simultaneously move forward in their commitments and to look for social justice in the commitments of environmental justice, and to make the necessary transition, economic, social, political, so that we do not depend on oil and carbon. And in addition to this, to be able to comply with the payment of their foreign debt. Since 2020, 2023 and 2024 in the budget of Colombia, the foreign debt increased to 40%. That this is the tax. This comes from a tax reform that we made in 2022. We must think ways on how to do these transitions. However, the Colombian government is committed to this transition for two essential reasons. The first one, because we understand that if Colombia does not make this transition, which is not a transition of the energy matrix, but a productive transition instead, that is to stop depending 60% of the tax income, the exports of oil, and to stop depending on this commercial balance in 40% of the exports of oil and carbon. I think that this is what has been sustaining for 20 years the Colombian economy. We're going to have a terrible crisis if the world doesn't understand that we need to decarbonize. To us, this is an economic and environmental agenda. It's not just an economic agenda. When we are going to look into our country, what is the heritage and the future economy of the 21st century? What we have found is that the biodiversity and the cultural diversity with a social basis of what can be the wealth of the Colombian population for the century, which is the century for the advocacy for life. In this regard, we must protect that 51% of forests that we have in our territory, and that over 60% are located in the Amazon region in Colombia, and that is quite threatened because of several causes. One, deforestation. When we talk about deforestation, we have also to be clear. Deforestation has been caused, yes, by criminal groups in the case of Colombia, but it has also been caused by the Colombian government when they decided to bring extractivist companies to the department of Putumayo, for instance, for the extraction of oil. Because those extractions, they create deforestation, and this also affects the social and cultural context. So it doesn't make any sense for the Amazon region to get to the point of no return and simultaneously to demand to stop the exploration and production of oil and gas. Of course, the main emission companies there in the north, but it doesn't mean that we should not depend on this. And it turns out that now in the treaties of climate change, we do not place that conversation about ending the oil as such. What does it mean for an economic transition to a country like Colombia? Can we do this transition alone, or should we have a multilateral agreement and a joint plan that is that surpasses these CDNCs? Each country has to do everything that they can to relieve climate change. Well, in that road, we're following the road to less than 43% of the emissions. So we have to escalate this. We need multilateral agreements in order to overcome these problems. In this regard, to us, it is essential because we have seen at the same time the existence of both present and future. If we do not slow down climate change, even if we do we will make all the efforts to protect the Amazon region is not going to be safe. We have to be clear, it's not going to be safe. We can create a great bioeconomy, but we're not going to have any forests. And in order to slow down, phase out to slow down climate change, we need to stop expanding fossil fuels. Production is not going to help us stabilize the climate in 1.5. I'm not saying that this is delivered by the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. We have to reduce our phase out this gradually. If we don't do this right now, it's going to be more difficult in the future, and we are going to have less impact in the regulation of the climate. So this should be treated as an emergency. When we are in emergency, we must find extraordinary measures under logic that cannot be the same of the system that created that problem. And which are these? For instance, President Petro has proposed to have a financial framework that can be given by certain countries or in other countries to alleviate the debt through a multilateral mechanism in the IMF to avoid these problems in the with the fiscal space that is eating right part of the especially middle-income countries and vulnerable countries. We don't have a steady cash flow in the flow of resources within the country. So President Petro is going to support formally, is thinking carefully and thoroughly about supporting the initiative and the treaty. Also, multilateral agreement and a serious plan that will allow us to do so. This treaty has a dimension that has not ever seen before. There are other international treaties that have given a result, but they are just, we're clear about some cause, and that's the cause that they address, but we are clear which are the effects of these chemicals that we are producing the ozone layer problem. It was like a more concrete thing, but here we are talking about a generalized transformation in the way this has been addressed. I would like to close my discussion by saying that in the speech of saving the Amazon region, it's not possible that we are to say that we are going to save it, and also to advance at the same time in extractivism. As you've mentioned in the graphics, Colombia exports today a total of the oil of the Amazon region, just 10%. So how we do a social and political agreement in order to slow down that expansion and to regenerate that piece of land with the indigenous communities, especially in the Department of Putumayo, because that's the local action. But what does this mean? If we don't have a common framework in order to slow down that expansion of fossil fuels in these areas, we talked with President Petro yesterday, we can invest in everything in the ecosystems. But if climate change keeps going and emissions as well, we're not going to be able to overcome this problem. We're going to be able to solve it. This is going to be lost investments. So really happy, and thank you so much for allowing us to be here, because we believe firmly that these two agendas that you are putting on the table are agendas that are extremely strategic, not only from the geopolitical standpoint, but from the perspective of life itself. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ms. Minister, for these processes. We're so happy to have the support of the government of Colombia for the treaty. We're going to talk a little bit about the context of Colombia and also the Brazilian contexts, and looking for different interests of oil. This is also the systems. We're going to talk a little bit about how we articulate these, about the importance of the product consultation, and also how to protect the Amazon region in Brazil.
Thank you to Minister Susana for this support and of the insurance of all the public things you're saying. This energetic transition that we're doing now of the use of oil and gas. Thank you so much, and congratulations for this decision that you have made of the country. I'm going to talk about Brazil. In Brazil, since my country, we have a minister of an indigenous a very important decision so that the indigenous can recover their territories, to delimit the territories. To approve measures is another objective. New measures to protect the indigenous communities. And what we're doing today is to share this emergency that we have in Brazil. We need a transition, an ecological transition, and an environmental transition that is not an emergency anymore, but an obligation of the government. They have to assume more radical decisions, as also the Congress also has to support the requests of the indigenous communities to delimit the territories. This is going to determine the future of the indigenous communities, the delimitation of the territories. What we are facing today, the phenomenon, the extreme phenomena of the climate that we're facing today, can only be avoided and cared thanks to the protection of the indigenous peoples, because we know that, and it's completely proven that they're the ones that are protecting the Amazon. They are the guardians of the Amazon. We indigenous are only 5% of the world population, but we protect more than 85% of the biodiversity of the planet. And as indigenous peoples, at the international levels, we present a solution to make front to this climate change globally. So it is key to make it viable to protect the indigenous territories that protect not only the Amazon, but they're protecting humanity. So we have to begin this transition to Brazil. As it says, the minister here is saying, in Brazil has every condition to do that energetic transition that is a need. We have sun, we have water. So now what we have to do is have clean proposals. To get out of the dependence of oil and gas, we must take measures to prevent the exploitation of oil, but also the exploitation of minerals. That is also presented as an alternative, but that it is equally dangerous for the indigenous communities. Also, another important subject is that of supporting the indigenous communities in the health issues that is very connected to the exploitation, to protect the territories and also protect the health of the indigenous peoples. We are currently talking about a climate crisis and of a social crisis. But we should not forget that the government of Brazil during many years has not had a role that is at the level of the climate and the health crisis and the social crisis. Let's not forget about this. And regarding now the climate crisis, what is the solution? What is the measure that the government has to do to care for this crisis and to attack this crisis? So a call that we do right now is to take that responsibility of the government so that they are also doing the responsibility of the companies and that they take this consciousness and change the ways that they are doing the things, and society with that role of being there, holding them accountable, and also to present alternatives that we're doing right now, the dialogue of the society, of the government, so that we can find a solution to this. So in Brazil, we talk about the indigenous peoples being at the center of the political decisions, but also the pressure is also big of the rights. The pressure is for the companies also, because the companies are still wanting to exploit more resources, and we need to guarantee the rights of the indigenous people. At the end, in the end, it is important to denounce all of the use, but we are in a moment that nature, Mother Nature, is also reacting, and that reaction is already a reality for a lot of people. That now we're in the hottest times. We are in that hottest 3 months. And the 3rd of September, we had the hottest day in Brazil, precisely the day that the indigenous women were marching in the streets. We're also against the violence of the territories and of the indigenous women. And now we had cyclones everywhere in the world, a lot of people dying, and it's due to the uncontrolled exploitation of oil and gas. We do not have an option. Right now, it is important to think in the future and act today, act now. Maybe in the future, we're not gonna be able to support that level of hot climates that we don't know what's gonna happen. So the measures that we have to take is today. And today we're here, and I am putting myself right now, not only as a minister, but also as a messenger to bring that call for that new consciousness, political and ecological, that the world needs. And that's why I'm here, to bring this into that institutionality. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We are thanking these two ministers. We know that these women have a lot of compromises. They're gonna have to leave very soon, but we just want to say how grateful we are for your presence here. I'm gonna give the word to Fanny, who's gonna tell us a little bit about the importance to protect the 80% of the Amazon for 2025, and what are the main demands of this campaign. Hello, everyone, and thank you for opening this space to the organizations, the allied organizations. I am thanking the two ministers that are here for the presence of these two governments that are the ones that are most committed with the Amazon cause. The initiative of Amazon for Life 8025, we protect 80% of the Amazon until the year 25 is a global strategy where the coalition, this alliance, necessary today to join forces. We need to join forces with allies that go and want the same road. That is why it is important that today it's not only something of the states, it's not a matter of the states and the governments to protect and save the Amazon. The civil society through the different allies, such as the ones that are doing so important studies like the ones that we have just seen. For example, the Alliance of 8025 has also made important studies around what is happening in the Amazon. And this is what is making this initiative happen, that is being born because the Amazon is in a tipping point. For the indigenous peoples, this tipping point is already here. Okay, it's not something that is going to come in the future. It's already here. We're already living today. The indigenous people are already living this. And we see that there are a lot of territories that are already suffering. That is why we are talking about the tipping point. We're not waiting for it, but it is actually already here. No return point. That's why in 2021, we already talked about this initiative and also talked about this with some allies. And we adopted in the Congress of a UCN in Marsella through the resolution. And in 2022, this alliance sends the inform of the countries of the Amazon. So it's a joint forces that today we need the states to continue to do this work, to understand how that no return point, that no return point could be avoided. In 2022, this work that we did also reached Montreal to the Summit of Biodiversity, and it's also the insertion of the indigenous territories in this coalition. And in 2023, here we have our colleague and that is here, Dario, in the Permanent Forum of the UN for Indigenous Causes, is also asking the governments the protection of 80% of the Amazon. And as Colombia is generating the proposals of the coalition, the government is also, through the Ministry of Environment, is officially adopting a position. The 80/25 is also as a pre-summit, as we could say. And then in the summit, we will talk about the subject to the 80/25. So solutions to the protection. We must have into consideration that for this work, as our Minister of Colombia has just mentioned, it is important for the indigenous populations and the people that inhabit the Amazon, that are the ones that possess the traditional ancestral knowledge, that knows how to protect and how to live in the Amazon without being a predator. And the studies have also shown that the territories indigenous are the ones that are more capable of preserving it. And then we also have a request in the summit of the Amazon of juridical security. What does this mean? The legalization of the indigenous territories, the ancestral territories of the indigenous peoples, to be recognized. to their original owners so that they can continue protecting them. That's like what we ask, guarantee. We don't see that this is being respected. It's not being respected. The economy, they don't care about going into a protected area, park, a forest, and to log. But at least in the territories, we do have a possibility so we can protest or make a. The parks in Colombia are gigantic. It's not 3 or 4 acres. It's areas that are very, very big. And we have many that are really, really big. So there's also a proposal to act 100 million, 100 million acres in the Amazon to be protected in Colombia. The protection of the Amazon has to be adopted. It's not 9 countries, it's one ecosystem that requires protection, the integral protection over the Amazon. For example, we cannot leave on one side water. We cannot forget about water. Where is the water coming from? It is the most valuable hydric resource that we have that is feeding the rivers. What is this? The Amazonian, the Andes, Amazonian Andes. So all of these things we need to take into account because it is important to understand where the water of the rivers of the Amazon are coming from. So give them the same importance that we're giving to the forest. So today to go there with the allies and the coalition 8025, this is also a subject, a priority object to work on the water. Talk about the water. Another of the requests that we do is the hold on all extractivist actions, exploration extractivist actions in the Amazon. And this is not even about, we're gonna explore. No, explore hydrocarbons in the Amazon, fossil fuels in the Amazon. What does it mean? To give in a platter to the companies where they are located, where the blocks are located, and tell them, there is a well, here is a well. To the governments, we give them this information. When the government doesn't have any intention to protect, they're like, oh, we're not gonna exploit, but we are gonna explore. No, this is also doesn't make sense. It is we're giving the information to those that exploit oil. So it is also important to protect this and it is important to protect 255 million acres in the Amazon. So the coalition also, as an organization that is representing the 9 countries where we have the Amazon, requires the strengthening. So these subjects can be taken, should be taken with the importance, and we can go everywhere in the Amazon to accompany and support all of the people that are defending. They showed the face of our Cofan brother that defended his territory, and that in Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela. And little attention have we really given to this, but it is important to understand that the indigenous peoples have to be taken into account for these policies that are being done, including the Guyana Francesa. In the Amazon, there are peoples that have not even been, there are peoples that have not been recognized, their rights have not been recognized. And this is one of the jobs that we have to do of this coalition, an international coalition. We have to walk towards there. Together, with the governments, civil societies, and the indigenous peoples. We have to be together and hold together and go into this effort of 1825, an integral overview to defend the Amazon. Thank you so much.
We know how this impacts the different communities, and now I would like to invite you to talk about Loretos and talk about the consequences of the health and the indigenous groups, and they are coming together to fight. Thank you very much. Well, indeed, first of all, I would like to thank all the organizers and the presence of the Minister of Environment of Ecuador and the different peoples from Colombia, and the Amazon region brothers who have joined us today. Well, I would like to state that we are bringing a message from the indigenous peoples in the forest of the Peruvian state. For many, many years, we've been going through an environmental contamination crisis. In that context, I would like to say that the indigenous peoples, for over 40 years, have been suffering from the oil spillage across our territories. And the government has done very little to remediate these problems that we have gone through. We have the pipelines in the northern part of the territory. However, the indigenous peoples are increasingly in precarious state in terms of health, in food security, education. We are really going through a severe crisis. That's why I would like to share with you that the indigenous peoples have never been the obstacles for development. However, these they have suffered from the decisions of the states because of the indigenous peoples have no knowledge about these. They have accepted for these pipelines to go across their territory. But we are going through a very difficult work. These problems keep increasing. We don't want to keep living this way. Indigenous peoples, our forest, our different areas. That's where we are suffering all the crisis. And the impacts that we have been suffering because of the hydrocarbons, that's 16 and 17 different peoples, and the 9 nationalities that are one the Awahun, Chapa, Candesli, Quechua, Kokan, Chai, who welcome most of the peoples in the Amazon and Loreto. They are announcing these acts in order to phase out the fossil fuels and to leave oil underground. because we have inevitable actions to avoid the prevent from this exploitation, because this is not a sustainable project for the Amazon region. And that's why I would like to share with you in this meeting our problem. The indigenous peoples cannot stay with their arms crossed. And with the allies, we have requested them to work hardly to keep resisting the business that we still have. All the Amazon region communities have come together in order to slow down and stop this problem. This to us is a threat. For all the indigenous peoples and the Amazon region in general. In fact, let me say that why are we the obstacles as indigenous peoples? We are not the obstacles, though we take care of our forests, because to us, in the COVID time, the pandemic, the government didn't come to our territories. We had to defend ourselves with our traditional knowledge. Both men and women have that. And that's why the indigenous peoples have not died COVID. Thanks to our traditional ancestral knowledge, we have survived in spite of the sanitary crisis that we lived worldwide. We as indigenous peoples, with all the wisdom that we have defended ourselves, and not because the Peruvian government has come to assist the indigenous peoples. We have no hospitals, we have no schools or emblematic schools. We have schools thanks to the communities, and they actually built them. And to us, as government, is not translating into oil, gas, or carbon. To us, this means to defend, to advocate, and to work jointly with all the brothers and sisters of the Amazon region in order to find strategies on how to support these people that have been fighting all along. And I request all the attendees to join efforts. Please help us defend our Amazon region. Please help us defend against this threat that we live in, both men and women. And working together, our youth is also becoming part of this fight and this resistance fight that we've been having. That's why I would like to share this message with you so that you can join us in this fighting in order to defend and advocate the Amazon region. I know that you can place your hands on your heart and you're going to support one way or the other. You are going to contribute with one small grain so that we can share each other. This is a joy for the indigenous community, because your support means a lot. Thank you to all my partners who have because they know the Amazon region and they are supporting the Amazon region. And we hope that the allies can come together and to help us disseminate our problem and our statements come, of course, come out in Spanish. We need to translate this into English so that you all can understand what are we trying to say. And the statement is going to be translated and shared together with you. And in this regard, brothers and sisters, I would like to request you all that to get to know a little closer to this Amazon region, not only from the United States, but to actually travel to these regions to understand and learn about the real and actual demands of the Amazon region, because we all are there, both men and women working together. And this is the that we always have. And our motto is the Amazon region is live, and we are going to have a live basic here. Thank you very much, and everyone.
Now welcome our second panel to come forward. Kleber Caripuna, por favor. Carola Mejia, Alex Rafalovic, Nemo Nikita, Darío Mejia Montalvo. Convidados. We will start now our second panel of the day, Pathway to Safeguarding the Amazon, Where Do We Go From Here? I am excited to introduce to our incredible panelists, Kleber Caripuna, é uma liderança indígena do povo Caripuna do Amapá, coordenador executivo da Articulação dos Povos Indígenas do Brasil, a PIB, é graduado em
So we have, he's graduated in environmental studies. This is one of the very few advocates of the indigenous peoples. He's also counselor of the state of Mosola. Also of international cooperation, also coordinator in the climate networks, regional networks as well, and her experience the past 8 years has to deal with the climate finances and the climate justice. Currently, she's advisor in climate finances for economic and social development, and
Alex
consultant.
Rafalovic
Alex
is the executive director of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative. He's a lawyer with experience as a policy analyst, campaign organizer, and strategist for climate justice. Previously, Alex was the global director of programs at 350.org and served as a strategic advisor at Code Nation and was the executive director at the Climate Action Network of Australia.
We have Nikita. She is a leader from the Amazon region of Ecuador. She started to organize herself, and she's inspired by the war historians and of her grandmother, who obtained first the legalization of the Guarani territory. Now she is activist and an advocate of the territories and the rights of indigenous peoples in the across the Amazon region in Ecuador, member of the Association of Guarani Women of Ecuador. She was vice chair of the Guarani organization, and currently she is part of the Confederation of Indigenous Communities of the Amazon region in Ecuador, representing 11 nationalities, indigenous nationalities, and 23 nationalities. He is a consultant of the Permanent Forum of the United Nations for Indigenous Matters. Also, she's worked in Colombia. She has a master's degree in management of the development of the University of the region of autonomous regions of Nicaragua. Now we are going. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening. Also in the indigenous territory, this has been attacked here in Brazil. With the action of the of oil companies and the indigenous peoples in the Rivera, and this has been great conflict in these indigenous communities, especially the proliferation of fossil fuels in this area is being affected very quickly. And of course, the indigenous movements, they are always opposed, to dialogues on this matter. We have one sustained dialogue across the movement. This dialogue is to discuss topics of the indigenous peoples and their rights. And we are currently seeing the growth of the oil exploration, especially in the Amazon region, and it is creating a huge and negative impact. Under the Brazilian government, we are living a very negative scenario in Brazil, but we need to have fruitful dialogues and for the government to expose certain ideas and projects. The government has been working on civilizing these explorations, especially in regard to oil and gas in Brazilian territory. So we need a constant dialogue in order to avoid those new oil productions and to keep affecting our indigenous peoples in Brazilian territory. Also, the exploration in the Amazon region mainly, and the opportunity that Brazil has to work in a much more, in a well-balanced way and environmentally correct, and potentially to organize other types of combustibles. This is not just a debate for oil. We are having different strong discussions. And across the Amazon region, and also the exploration and production. They need to come to the government in order to make sure and provide security and to stop strongly and to stop the progress in these regions who are under a threat and constant risk, especially in this region, the Amazon region. And this is actually a case in the port of Amapá, on the coast of the Amazon region, and that our region is suffering. And there is a huge movement working upon this exploration, and the indigenous peoples are suffering because of these advance of the oil exploration. So we need, once again, a specific debate and through a more explanatory process so that we can discuss in a constructive way and to be able to reform those ideas of based on the exploration of oil. And not only that, but also in the other areas of Brazil, we want this discussion to be carried out because this has for years left severe impacts because of previous oil explorations and production. We need a government that is more prone for discussions where we need solutions. And I hope that within the Brazilian Congress, we can put on the table and start discussing about the protection of the indigenous peoples and the rights that they have within that region. Because this is a great threat. And also the questioning towards their integrity is growing more and more. In the border with Paraguay, sometimes this is not respected. In this region, and especially the Guarani community, who's working very strongly in order to protect our territory. So we're saying that the French Guiana was a victim, where we had other victims against the indigenous peoples. So the government thought that they were tolerating this, but this is a sectorial fight. And where we have to protect our lands, which is a huge area. So there was a discussion that was carried out by the previous governments. There are some allies, and we keep fighting and working in order to have a better hope for the indigenous peoples so that they can have the right to their own land and to have education, health, and security. And for these projects to be avoided in order to have stability for our territories and to be free of any type of production that hinders the growth of our communities. And the indigenous movements are ready to keep fighting against extractivism, against the indigenous peoples, and to guarantee the multicultural lives for the indigenous population. This is my message from the indigenous movements, and that together we can work to face this severe crisis that is affecting us. And thank you very much for this presentation. We also know that there are many areas that the projects of exploration that they are key pieces for local development, and that many countries are tied to the oil production to produce income and to try to pay their foreign debt. Now we're going to talk to Carol how this is the oil production is boosted in the Amazon region, which is injustice for those territories. Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm Carol Mejia, from Latin from Bolivia. My presentation is in English, but I'm going to speak in Spanish because I think the majority who speaks Spanish here. Okay. Well, first of all, I would like to say that Latin has been working by analyzing different topics, socially, economically, and climate matters as well in the past 2 years. This is a topic that we must take into account. Just to have some data of the region of the countries that we belong to, although these are very rich countries with a lot of nature, have also structural problems. There are high rates of poverty, poor access to basic services, unemployment, and very high levels of debt that has impacted us, especially after the pandemic. And this is also a production of an extractivist model that is good, dependent. We have 11% of this is quite. We have the responsible only for 11% of global GHG emissions, but it's highly vulnerable to climate because this is quite unfair because it does not reflect actually all the vulnerabilities we have, and these also hinders us to have a financial means for the alleviation of the debt. After 500 years of colonialism, we are still subjected to a very unfair financial system that promotes indebtedness as a mechanism to keep depending on rich countries. This is something that we have seen that must change. We are trying to promote a different narrative.
Okay, maybe if you can go to the third one. Yes. I think it's not working. Okay, we have identified a big link. Hemos identificado un link muy.
We have identified a huge link between extractivism and climate crisis and finances. At the least, the lesser our debt, the lesser we can invest in climate change, and to be able to recover from the climate events that are impacting in a differentiated manner to the different groups that are the most vulnerable and unprotected. On the other hand, many countries of the region and around the world of the global south are paying more interest rates rather than investing in health or education. This is something that is telling us that we're wrong. And on the other hand, we have high debts, and this means a lot of pressure for the government to keep investing in extractivism in Bolivia. We depend a lot on the export of gas. So our governments keep doing that, and they have actually approved a project that allowed the exploration and production of oil and gas in protected areas. They have opened these protected areas to mining oil and gas in order to produce the income to pay the debt. There are 10 countries in the region that are quite close to this model. Thirdly, the very unfair is that the greater the vulnerability, climate vulnerability of the country, the greater is the interest rate. So this is a vicious circle that is happening around the logic of extractivism that does not allow us to move forward. On the other hand, the climate financing of the northern and rich countries of $1 billion per year, and up to 2020, they have not been compliant with, and they are doing this through loans. 81% of climate finance come from loans, and they are not necessarily cheap. They are quite expensive. We have to repay this. So this is something that we must observe in terms of climate justice. Thank you. All climate events are creating these losses, and these are being covered with more and more data. This is the scheme that I wanted to show. I explained most of them so we can move forward. We are actually implementing the project in 5 countries with the Amazon region, Colombia, Bolivia, Peru, Ecuador, and Suriname. To determine data, we need hard data about the dependency on extractivism and this quality of climate financing and these effects and impacts that are being created upon the indigenous populations in these Amazon region in the different countries. We have 5 allies that are working on the information of this regard. They are about to give us the results and the consequence of this project. What we want to do is to move forward to our communication strategy and to an advocacy strategies that we involve the indigenous people, the local communities, and to actually trigger all of this alarm that will let us know exactly where are we at the climate crisis. This is not allowing us to move forward. And we also agree with the Treaty of Non-Proliferation of fossil fuels. We actually the only solution we have for the climate crisis, and we support this, but we have to understand that our countries will have to make this transition progressively. The South global countries have other priorities, which is the adaptation, and we need to guarantee the resources. We needed to guarantee the compliance with the international financing that has been established that have not been complied with, and the resources or financial resources come here not as a debt, but to be public, to be like as donations and to come as a way to repair the climate crisis with the main countries, which are the climate debtors, and that has caused the impact ecologically and the planet and people. We also promote other types of mechanisms that climate financing as it is, that they are not getting to the front line. Sometimes it's inefficient, sometimes it takes 5 years for a project to be approved, which is a shame. And this is it's a little accessible, it has little accessibility, and it is not cheap. There are other mechanisms that have been approved after the pandemic as an emergency mechanism to inject liquidity and money. This is done through the approval if there is a political will, but there should be no conditions. But unfortunately, the way the mechanism is working, this has been distributed and equitably, and sometimes some of these countries they don't use this, and this has to change, and they have to account for the realities and needs of the country. And there are other types of mechanisms, for instance, the cancellation of the debt. There are the exchange of debt, but this has been extremely inefficient in terms of the repayment of the debt. So we don't support this mechanism, although they can help us some. We need something bigger. And I would like to bring an example here. For instance, after World War II, we forgave the debt to Germany. In fact, the institutions of Bretton Woods, the World Bank, the IMF have been established to rebuild Germany and those countries that were devastated after World War II. Why should we think that these institutions that have to reform themselves, why don't they account for the realities of the crisis that we are living, which are happening mainly in the global south, that the impact is on the global south populations. And this is not just a matter of justice or solidarity, but of repair. The Northern Globe countries should guarantee and comply with all these commitments. I'm so sorry that I couldn't use the presentation, but of course I'm going to share it with you later on. Thank you very much.
We apologize in advance because we are really short on time, so I asked the final panelists to be quick on their interventions.
That's why we needed phase out or a phase out of the fossil fuels. Now, we are going to talk about a proposal of non-proliferation area in the Amazon region. What is this about, and what do we need to accomplish this? Okay, so I would like to invite you all to share everything that you have learned with the concrete examples of the Yasuni case and the historical referendum last month that got 60% of votes in order to forbid the exploitation and or of oil in protected areas and the Yasuni National Reserve Park. Thank you very much to everyone, the donors, and all our friends who have made this possible, this event. I come from a people that is part of the reserve, the Yasuni, that lives within the reserve. However, the government has committed a lot of damage within these territories. We have wanted the referendum, but this is just the first step to opening a real path, and the real fight is about to start, because after 10 years, Ecuador made the right decision and the historical decision to say yes to life, yes to Yasmin, and to protect the life of nature and also the life of the isolated peoples who are part of the Warani group and that are inhabiting these reserve areas. And we can see how these 5 years we've been able to complete, but every single day we live with these contamination diseases on site, and we can actually see how much damage these corporations can make in these territories. That's why the indigenous leaders like to make a call to the world government to leave the fossil fuels underground and to develop a clean energy transition plan. We as leaders, we've been always fighting, and this has also been, it has also been hard. We have been threatened, and many of the leaders have been victims of violence. Some of them have been in jail, and there has been also a political persecution. It has been really hard to be in the front lines and to keep fighting all the time and always to be under threat all the time, especially for the leaders of the fight. That's why, in order to protect the life of our future generations, we need to phase out for good the contamination and the extraction of fossil fuels. No more contamination, no more diseases on site, because we have sacrificed our territory so that they can develop other cities and other fossil fuels that have gone outside Ecuador and that have damaged the territories. One of the greatest purchasers of the Yasmin Park is Los Angeles. They buy the Ecuadorian oil. So I think that we have to raise awareness of the damages that these corporations are causing on site. Why Los Angeles cannot exploit their own cities? If they, why do they have to come out to the oil wells in Ecuador and make damage to our territories? There's no development. What they have left us is just diseases, poverty, and death. That's the only thing that exists on our territory. That's what we have. And that's why I concur with many leaders who are in these activities and these actions. We need urgent and solutions in order to fight climate change. We have also seen that there is a lot of contamination. And what does this bring to us? Just death. Death is arriving in our territories. That's why we are saying that they must stop and provide real and fast solutions. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for the participation in the public indigenous peoples, public policies, and the other scenarios. That is going to provide us the final comments. Thank you very much for the invitation. I've been listening to all the interventions, and thank you. Okay, the party has started here. Okay, so just to say or add a little bit of what my previous colleagues have already said, but just a few general aspects that is worth mention. And remember, we've been talking about the region where more states have recognized the international instruments like the agreement 169, where we've been affected, indigenous peoples, the second region with the greatest indigenous population of the second one after Asia, but where the indigenous peoples conserve the greatest amount of biodiversity of the planet, and their territories take care 2 times more of territories than other conservation figures that have been created by the states and the international instruments. However, we are conceptually we're saying that it is important to remember that we're talking about the peoples that exist on these territories before the composition of the states. And that is the source of their rights. The source of the rights of the indigenous peoples are not the international instruments nor the political constitutions, but its existence, their existence themselves, their own ecosystem, their own value system. So this separation between culture and nature is not of the indigenous peoples. So what are the indigenous peoples? We should start by saying what are not the indigenous peoples. These are not represented by the governments, and these are not civil societies because they are not part of this division between civil society and the government that comes from the Occident, the Western tradition and European and modern tradition. These are not local communities. They are not a category of planning such as vulnerable populations or minorities. That is extremely to understand because the indigenous peoples are fundamentally peoples. Recently, when in some scenario we said, okay, what is the most important thing that we should do? What is the main recommendation that we must do for the Amazon region? So the main recommendation is that we have to leave them be. Let's leave the Amazon region to be what it is and to leave the indigenous to be whatever they are. So we live in, but it doesn't mean that if we leave them to be as they are, it doesn't mean that not to do anything, because we need and require a lot of effort for action because these entails, and we have said this, we need, it entails a political transformation, and the main one has to deal with transforming the vision of a human superiority upon the nature. And also the combination between culture and nature. And this entails, for instance, to assume the centralized policies, the public policies that are separated sectorially speaking, and this is a way of organization that does not account for that holistic vision of the indigenous peoples. These are aspects of the public policies that deserve to be reviewed because, in the words of those who have previously spoken, after the pandemic, the humanity as a whole is being violated by that virus. And what's the antidote of that virus of monoculturalism and colonialism? Well, that's diversity and the systems of knowledge in this case. And these can be only implemented if there is the transformation of the institution and the financial operations, as you have already put forward. Please, you have to. Okay, well, I'm going to conclude with this. You have put forward the different transformations of the financial institutions and the multilateral institutions in the region, but essentially with the participation of the indigenous peoples as actors in decision making. Thank you. Okay, now I give floor to Alex. Thank you very much, and to all the panelists who have attended to this space for the foundation and for the fossil fuel treaty, and also the use of the line. And all those nations who have supported this call internationally. Now, this is a historical and very important moment and a great effort of indigenous peoples, the communities, and the civil society together in Ecuador to carry out the victory of the Yasuni and the great effort of our people, our colleagues from Brazil and the indigenous peoples, how they are resisting the advance of the industry, because that's the initiative of the fossil fuel treaty. This is not just a treaty because treaty does not exist. This is actually a campaign. This is a concept. This is an idea. And this is an idea that has been coming from a perspective outside the nations or the state. This is a vision of how to reinvent our economy and our world. This is an idea that started from the fights of the indigenous peoples and the different communities in regard to a vision of resistance to and reluctance to extractivism system, especially oil, gas, and carbon extraction, because the extraction of those products are the greatest source of climate change, which is the crisis that exists, and also this is also sees locally in these damages the populations living near those destructions, and they are attacking the sovereignty and the culture of the peoples living around those areas. This becomes a threat to their health and to the communities in the transportation roads and wherever they burned those products. And so these are big sources of death, and this is the combustion of fossil fuels. So the risk of fossil fuels are risk that are posed risk to all our lives, not only climate change. So we need a treaty that is trying to address this directly. We have three principles within our vision, and there is, we should just stop any new projects of carbon, oil, and gas. No more of them. There is, we need an agreement and an equitable exit of the existing production, and that we need an international cooperation for just transition. None of these pillars would have been possible without the participation of the indigenous nations on the table. It wouldn't be possible with the civil society because the vision of a new treaty, this is not only a new treaty in what is right now touching, but also in the way we are going to build this project. So nowadays, this proposal is a campaign supported by the network and by over 3,000 organizations who are making campaigns, raising awareness, making proposals in their own context. And there are 6 countries so far. These are countries that have indigenous origins as well because they come from the Pacific Ocean, who have made the proposal of this concept in the United Nations. So we are waiting for the rest of the countries to have and receive this call to keep negotiating and to build a new framework that can offer us an exit and stepping out of fossil fuels and to consolidate a world where we respect first life. And this is an effort that I would like to invite you all so that we can keep developing in your own context. And thank you very much for the attendance and participation today. And we are going to keep fighting together. Thank you very much.
Muchísimas gracias, Alex.
Thank you very much, Alex.
Berman, our chair and the founder of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, for some closing remarks. Deborah has been designing advocacy campaigns and advising governments for over 30 years. She's the international program director at Stand Earth and the chair and founder of the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty.
No, don't use the mic. Don't use the mic. Don't use the mic.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Natalia, and to all of our incredible speakers today for taking the time to be with us for this important and critical conversation. We've heard bold visions from all of these presenters for how to protect the Amazon. How Amazonia for Life, protecting 80% by 25, can protect the Amazon from passing the tipping point caused by extractivism and deforestation. How a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty, non-proliferation zone would show how the treaty could happen in practice, using government powers to ensure no fossil fuel expansion, and why protecting and supporting Indigenous rights, territories, and security is just so critical. These visions and principles are going to be essential in the effort moving forward to protect the Amazon from destruction. As we consider these solutions for which governments and Indigenous nations are key players, solutions like 80 by 25 and treaty, it's also the case that right now, business as usual from banks who fund oil companies, agriculture, and other extractivism beyond Amazonian destruction is pushing the Amazon past the tipping point. COICA, STAND, Amazon Watch, MOSIC, and other allies have been working to stop these private drivers of destruction, like the banks funding oil and gas in the Amazon. As Kevin from Amazon Watch mentioned, in the last 3 years, 6 banks have already committed to exiting oil trade, while BNP Paribas, ING, and other banks have now gone even further, committing to regional exclusions for investment as part of an Amazon exit approach to defunding new oil and gas in the region. For years, banks have had exclusion zones for the Arctic, for tar sands. Why not for the Amazon? When BNP Paribas made this decision, they moved billions of dollars of oil trade out of the Amazon, and we're calling on the other banks to do the same. Capitalizing on collapse, research into bank deals exposing 8 leading banks, 3 of them headquartered right here in New York City, Citi, JP Morgan Chase, and Goldman Sachs as leading investors in oil and gas in the Amazonia, is the new report that was just released by COICA and STAND. This research and data and transparency is critical to getting action in the Amazon, to stopping this destruction right now. We know who's funding Amazon destruction today, and part of our challenge is to make it understood that the investments of the financial community must align with the vision of Indigenous leaders to support 80 by 25, to ensure that the vision for a fossil fuel non-proliferation zone in the Amazon is not undermined by investment decisions made by these bankers acting at a distance. Regarding the treaty in Latin America, we're very thankful for the work of all of our allies and their leadership in championing for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty in very difficult contexts. In the last few months, we've started discussing the idea of a fossil fuel non-proliferation zone in the Amazon with Indigenous communities and organizations. And we're happy to say, as we've heard today, it's an idea that resonates as a tool to protect this incredible region. In the scenario of a climate crisis, the Amazon is a key territory for its capacity to store carbon underground, as well as, of course, for the biological and cultural diversity it harbors, and for the responses to the climate crisis that have emerged from the people who inhabit it. Continuing with the exploitation of fossil fuels in the Amazon, it is incompatible with our climate goals here at Climate Week and the actions needed to limit global temperatures to 1.5 degrees Celsius. In this sense, it's essential that the Amazon states take effective and concrete actions to avoid greater impacts to this key territory. So we must initiate a pathway to get rid of fossil fuels in the Amazon, strengthen policies and mechanisms to address the demands and guarantee the participation and decision-making of Indigenous peoples and local communities, generate local economic development alternatives and respect for Indigenous economy, and initiate the transition towards a new energy model in a way that is fair and people-centered. These actions require international cooperation, including financial support from rich countries in the global north who have historically benefited the most from the use of fossil fuels. It's not good enough to say you don't have the funds when these same countries are subsidizing the most profitable companies on the planet, the oil industry, who doubled their profits last year. The IMF reports that our governments in the wealthy North are subsidizing the fossil fuel industry $13 million a minute. We need to stop handing money to the polluters and stop supporting the people who have a vision of protecting their territories. The leadership shown by those who protect the Amazon must be matched by the rest of the world to allow this region to thrive. Thank you all for your leadership, for your inspiring work and vision, for taking the time during this very busy week to have this important conversation. We look forward to working with you to support Indigenous rights, to protect the Amazon, and to see a global fossil fuel treaty become a reality. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sephora, and thank you everyone once again for joining and staying with us for this important debate. We hope to continue this conversation in different forums, different countries to bring forward the proposal for a fossil fuel-free Amazon. We apologize because we don't have time anymore for questions, but we have a coffee break outside the room, so we can invite you all to continue the conversation outside. Thank you again very much.
Thank you.